it's a regular girl. So time is an interesting thing. It can change, say for example, the way I'm going to tell the story, but it doesn't change the story, does it? So I'm going to tell the story this way. A few years back, I heard something about something called MK Ultra, which is a government program about mind control and some other things. But I also heard about some other kinds of various other government programs, many of them. And because of these programs and what they involve, I began to think that I and members of my family were involved in some of these programs. And here's why. Because the members of my family, my father, we didn't know who his ancestors were. And we didn't know who my mother's ancestors were either. Turns out that those were secrets of the family. But then there were other things about my father. For example, that there was Frankfurt, Germany was involved. And Frankfurt, Germany is a buzzword for the Nazis. And also these government programs. And there was missing ancestry in my father. There's also a lot of abuse in my father's early childhood. And MK Ultra is a program that has to do with abuse and trauma-based mind control. So me and my brother and my sister experienced this kind of abuse. But the kinds of abuse that we experienced were strange kinds of abuse. And there came a time in my life where I began to listen to a lot of internet radio, which involved a lot of people's stories and histories. But also throughout my life, I was involved in various numbers of ways of listening to other people's stories and histories, personal histories. So I had heard a lot of stories of abuse, and yet the kind of abuse that me and my brother and sister had experienced was still extraordinary. It was rare. But it wasn't until I really had listened sort of worldwide that I began to say to myself, no, this kind of abuse that my sister and brother and I had experienced was rare. It was strange. And it was because my father had learned it somewhere. So it either had been in his childhood or when he was in the army in Frankfurt, Germany, or in training before that, somewhere he had learned this. My mother's history comes from her mother, who, because she had witnessed the murder of her mother, her father, her biological father, as far as we know, had died when she was young, before the age of 8, because she was 8 years old when she witnessed the murder of her mother, and she was living in New York City, then went to live in an orphanage on the Hudson River. Her brother went to another orphanage, and then her sister, who was a baby, 2 years old, also went to live in an orphanage, but a different one. They were separated, and we were led to believe throughout our childhood that when my grandmother left the orphanage when she was 18, that they also went and sort of captured or rescued the younger sister and brought her with them at a later date in the rumble seat of an automobile. And it wasn't until years later in the year 2000 and something, when my grandmother died and I went upstairs and found all these letters, that there was a different name of her sister. So I'm not sure if they took the right person with them. It may have been a stranger that they, quote, rescued from the other orphanage. But this sister took with her a newspaper, a cutout newspaper article of the murder of the great-grandmother, and I have a copy of that. Maybe I should get back to this MK Ultra program, which I think that my family is a part of, because there are other reasons why I think. There also seems to be a targeting of the people with special abilities, and I had some of those. So do other members of my family. And I think that we may be part of this group because we could have been sort of followed, tagged, and watched by the military, because it does seem, once I found out about this, that we always had been close to or near and in special programs where we were watched and measured in my scholastic abilities. I was always taken out of the classes and put in special programs and watched for my academic abilities in which I was excelling. And I had musical abilities. And my sister and I had what are called, I guess, psychic abilities. They call it remote viewing. So these are some of the reasons why I think that perhaps my family was involved in this program. And that's what I wanted to talk about. However, there were, like I said, these horrific and strange forms of abuse. Sexual was one of them, psychological was another, and physical was the other. Forms of abuse that took place directly in my home when I was growing up. But we were also told about, by my father, about the forms of abuse, that some of them anyway, that he experienced, and some that my mother saw, and then others that I observed in her. So I'm going to stop here now.